There are a lot of things people used to get away with that wouldn't slide today. Welcome to Bumblebee. I'm your host Dayna, and today we are talking about the top 10 messed up things spoiled kings did in history. At number 10, we have having grooms of the stool. You know you're spoiled royalty when you have a designated person to analyze your bodily waste to make sure you're as healthy as possible. But that's not all. The groom of the stool was required to transport the king's portable chamber pot, and they had to keep a detailed ledger of what the waste looked like in order to monitor the health of the king. They were with the king for the full day, because you never know when the royal one needs to go, but it was eventually used as an almost spy tactic, because since they spent so much time with the king, they learned about his strengths, his weaknesses, and secrets about him that a regular peasant may not have known. So even though their job consisted of carefully documenting the king's bodily waste, it was regarded as a high-status job. Only a king was able to have a groom of the stool. At number 9, we have dressing based on social status. This was put into place as a way to separate the nobles from the locals. Now, this isn't exactly practiced today, but we do have some similar things. In the Middle Ages, kings would put a length limit on pointy shoes, which were very in fashion at the time. And if a local wore a shoe over 2.5 inches in length to the point, the local man wearing them would be fined, as this was frowned upon because only kings could wear shoes longer than that. Kings could also dictate what colors people could wear because only royalty should have access to the royal colors like purple and scarlet. And the king was also allowed to dictate what fabric people wore, stating that no one with a status lower than a knight was allowed to wear velvet or anything that resembled silk, because they were royal fabrics. At number 8, we have banning sports. This is just another way royalty attempted to separate themselves from locals. It began with soccer because the men who were playing gradually became more aggressive and competitive, and it often led to many casualties and sometimes even fatalities. So it was banned, and if you were caught playing, you could be jailed for up to 6 days. The next sport that was banned was tennis. It was banned because it was deemed a royal sport, and only nobles could play, or anyone with a status higher than a knight. King Henry was often known to be an enjoyer of tennis. Something else to note was that locals were not allowed to watch the game of tennis because it would distract them from their work and they would gamble on it, which was also a problem amongst locals. However, there was one exception to this. Locals were allowed to join the nobles when playing tennis on Christmas. So as messed up as it is to ban a sport like tennis, at least they could put their differences aside for the holidays. At number 7, we have sleeping with the enemy. It's not quite as scandalous as you may think. Kings would often sleep in the same bed as other kings from other kingdoms to improve their bond as brothers, and not as rivals. But marrying for political purposes wasn't out of the question either, which I'll get into a little bit more later. Sleeping in the same bed with a full family was common, and as well as taking designated naps as a group wasn't heard on either. But because kings were often wanted unalive, they would have someone watch over them while they slept, or have a servant stay with them to make sure no one attempted to take them out in their sleep. So while it isn't entirely messed up, it does seem like a spoiled thing to do, especially if the king had them monitoring for hours at a time. At number 6, we have approving and witnessing public executions. We know that the act of watching people get offed in public was a regular practice, and they would host town meetings and gatherings to watch the person be offed regardless of the method, which in itself is honestly a strange practice. But sometimes they would have it set up in a way that the king could watch it happen in the comfort of his castle or a pedestal. So not only was he condoning people witnessing breathe their last breaths, but he would often give the go-ahead for the action too, because he was the king. He had the power to sentence anyone to lose their life, whether they were innocent or not. So if they were and he knew it, their life was quite literally in his spoiled and often unfair hands. At number 5, we have witnessing the consummation of marriage. There are some things we do in modern days that are pretty questionable, but not nearly as questionable as being allowed to watch a newly married couple prove their love for one another. Now, usually it was just attendees of the wedding, like parents and friends, but if they were of higher status, the king would have to be invited to watch as well. This wasn't always the case, but it was a relatively common practice, just so everyone knew your bloodline would continue and that both partners were loyal. Some of the attendees may have even cheered on two people doing the deed for some reason, I'm sure. Talk about performance anxiety. At number 4, we have Terrible Ivan. He's on here just by his name, because if this doesn't scream messed up, I don't know what does. It wasn't until his wife passed that he earned the title of Terrible, and it was later described as one of the most brutal kings in star history. He has a secret army that removed people from his political situation, and he accumulated a body count of up to 60,000 people. He also took no mercy on his son when his daughter-in-law was wearing something slightly revealing, because obviously that's his son's fault. And he even went as far to strike his daughter-in-law, which led her to miscarry, the next heir to the throne. He could be considered spoiled because no one stopped him from his reign, and he felt as if he was unstoppable, until his heart stopped due to disease. At number 3, we have having many wives and mistresses. It was actually a very common practice in the Middle Ages to have 1 or 2 wives and a handful of mistresses. But King Henry is the most notable, having 6 wives for mostly political alliances. There's a whole musical about it now, actually. But each wife had a different, very unfortunate end. The first being Catherine of Aragon, who divorced him because of her dedication to the Catholic Church, and passed away in her own company. The second was Anne Boleyn, who was originally supposed to be a fling, which led to marriage, but she was offed for treason because she could not produce any male offspring. The third was Jane Seymour, and he actually liked her, and her passing after giving birth to their son took a serious toll on King Henry. But they were originally married strictly for political purposes. The fourth was Anne of Cleves, who was a German princess who had a very negative impact on his reputation, and actually outlived his reputation, being dubbed as the king's sister, even though they were briefly married. His fifth and sixth wives were both Catherines as well, fifth being Catherine Howard, who was executed for adultery, and the sixth and final being Catherine Parr, who remarried and was the only wife to outlive him. Nowadays, if a man said he had 6 wives, people would be concerned for his well-being. And they would be even more concerned if he said he had 2 of them offed because he decided it was necessary. At number 2, we have having uncontrollable desires. The king who comes in at this point was the inspiration for Dracula, but the whole story is far more gruesome. Prince Vlad Tepes III was addicted to ending people's lives and would often do it in his free time because there was no other hobby that could satisfy him, apparently. He had numerous ways he would like his victims to end terribly, like throwing them over ledges or watching the life slowly fade from their eyes. He was given the name Dracul because it meant son of the dragon, which evolved to Dracula. What he did was genuinely messed up, and the only reason he got away with it was because he was the son of the hero of Romania and was deemed royalty, and people were too scared to go toe-to-toe with him. And last but not least, at number 1, we have eating deceased locals. Now this one is a little bit of a stretch because they didn't just munch on random bodies in the street. In the Middle Ages, apothecaries often sold fingers and toes and other small appendages from the recently deceased because they believed that a small part of the human essence was contained in the body after passing. So by eating the small parts, you were ingesting more life essence and would live longer. So of course, being royalty, you want to remain and rule for as long as possible. So the king and other nobles would often have human flesh as a snack to help them live longer. Some of the documented monarchs to take place in this were Charles II and William II, both from England, Francois I from France, and Christian IV from Denmark. There were a few other rulers who were against this practice, and it was said that the head of an ox would substitute as well. And that is going to be our list of messed up things spoiled kings did in history. If you feel like there was anything we missed, you could let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel. I have been your host Dayna, and thank you for tuning in to Bumblebee.